Terence Ashford was 41 years old, and for 9 years the woman he had married, supported, and rebuilt his entire life around had referred to him in public as the man she had outgrown. He drove a work truck with paint flecks on the steering wheel. He kept his tools organized in a way that most people mistook for poverty. Labeled bins, rotating stock, nothing wasted. Her friends had called him Quiet Terence, the handyman, the one who fixed things. Monique had smiled when they said it, the way a person smiles when they agree with something they don't want to say out loud. She had left him 14 months ago with a notarized letter and a forwarding address in Buckhead. She had taken half the savings account, which held $4,200 at the time, and she had not asked about the rest because she believed there was no rest. 6 weeks before the divorce was final, she had sent him an invitation. Ivory linen, gold foil, his name handwritten in calligraphy beneath a line that read, "Guest of the bride, table 14. She was marrying a man named Victor Landry, who owned 3 car dealerships in the greater Atlanta metro area and who had been photographed at a charity gala with Monique 4 months before the separation papers were signed. $4,200. That was what she thought he was worth. What Monique never asked, not once in 9 years, was what Terence did with the other phone, the one she had never seen, or why his accountant drove a nicer car than he did, or what the initials TAH Holdings meant on the deed she had never been shown. What happened next arrived at 30,000 feet per minute, in front of 240 guests, on the most expensive day of her life. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from, and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The coffee was still hot. Terence Ashford sat on the back porch of the house on Dill Avenue in East Atlanta, with the mug cradled in both hands and the morning settling around him in layers. The oak tree his grandmother had planted 40 years ago filtering the light, the neighbor's wind chime turning slowly in air that hadn't decided yet whether it was warm. He had been awake since 5. He had sanded and sealed the porch railing the week before, white oak finished with tung oil. And he ran his thumb along the grain now without thinking about it, the way a man checks something he built to make sure it's still holding. His grandmother had raised him in this house from the time he was 6. She had been a seamstress who took in alterations for 40 years, and who could look at a hem and tell you within a quarter inch whether it was right. She had told him once, pressing a crease into a pair of trousers on the dining room table, "People will always tell you what they think you're worth. You don't have to agree with them. You just have to outlast the opinion." He had outlasted a great deal since then. The house was modest by any measure that didn't understand what modest meant. 1,200 square feet, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen he had renovated himself with butcher block countertops cut from a single slab of walnut that a client had offered him in lieu of a final payment. The tile in the bathroom was hand-laid. The wiring was new. The plumbing had been redone 3 years ago by Terence and his uncle Curtis in a single weekend that ended with both of them sitting on overturned buckets in the yard, drinking sweet tea and not saying much, which was how they communicated best. He had met Monique at a neighborhood block party on Memorial Drive, a July cookout where someone had set up a speaker on a card table and the ribs were too sweet, and the potato salad was exactly right. She had been wearing a sundress the color of marigolds and had laughed at something he said about the structural integrity of the folding chair she was sitting in. And the laugh had been real, unguarded, the kind of sound a person makes before they start deciding who to be. They were married within a year. He had loved her the way he loved the house, with his hands, with his time, with the kind of attention that doesn't announce itself. She had changed in year 4. Not suddenly, the way paint changes, slowly, then you notice. He lifted the mug and drank, and set it back down, and watched a cardinal land on the railing he had finished, and the bird sat there for a moment as if inspecting the work, and then it left. His other phone, the one Monique had never known about, buzzed once in his shirt pocket. He checked it without expression, a confirmation from his attorney. He read it, locked the screen, and slid it back. The oak tree held the morning light like a hand holding water. The invitation had arrived on a Tuesday in a cream-colored envelope with no return address, which was a choice in itself. Terence had opened it at the kitchen counter with a butter knife and had read it standing up, the way you read something you already suspected was coming. Guest of the bride, table 14. The ceremony would be held at the Whitford Estate, a plantation-turned-event venue 40 minutes south of Atlanta, and the reception would follow on the West Lawn. Black tie, dinner and dancing, RSVP by the 15th. She had written his name by hand. He set the invitation on the counter and did not pick it up again for 3 days. When he did, he turned it over and found a small note on the back in Monique's handwriting. The same handwriting that had once left him notes on the refrigerator about groceries and Saturday plans, and where she'd be if he got home before her. The note read, "It would mean a lot to me if you came. No hard feelings. M." No hard feelings. He understood what the invitation was. It was not reconciliation. It was not closure. It was theater. She wanted him there, quiet Terence, the handyman, the man she had outgrown, seated at table 14, which he knew without checking would be the farthest table from the head, so that her new world could see the shape of the one she had left behind and feel the distance she had traveled. He had seen this architecture before, not in buildings but in people. Some people built upward, others built by tearing down what was next to them so they looked taller by comparison. He checked that invitation. He checked the RSVP. He wrote "attending" in block letters and mailed it back. Then he sat down at the kitchen table and opened the laptop Monique had never seen him use, and logged into a brokerage account she had never known existed, and reviewed the current valuation of TAH Holdings, the company he had built over 12 years, beginning with a single residential renovation contract in Decatur, and expanding, quietly and deliberately, into a commercial property development firm that now held controlling interest in 14 buildings across 3 states, managed a portfolio valued at $22.4 million, and employed a staff of 41 people, none of whom had ever met his ex-wife. His hands didn't shake. He had started the company the year before he met Monique, working from the kitchen table of this same house, filing his own paperwork, doing his own estimates, driving his own truck to every site. His grandmother had been alive then, sitting in the next room with her sewing machine, and she had watched him work without comment except once, when she had looked up from a sleeve she was resetting and said, "You're building something real. Don't let anybody rush you into showing it before it's ready." He had never shown it. Not to Monique, not to her friends, not to the neighbors who saw the truck and the paint-flecked boots and decided they understood. He kept the house modest. He kept the truck working. He kept the account separate and the phone separate, and the life he was building on the other side of the ledger entirely invisible, because his grandmother had taught him that the most valuable thing a man could own was the power of being underestimated. Monique had filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and had requested no alimony because she believed there was nothing to claim. Her attorney had reviewed the joint checking account, which held $4,200, and the house, which was paid off but appraised modestly, and had advised her that pursuing further discovery was not worth the cost. She had agreed. She had signed. She had walked away from a man she believed had nothing. And she had never once asked what TAH stood for. Terence Ashford Holdings. He closed the laptop. He made a single phone call to his pilot, a retired Air Force captain named Mitchell, who had been flying for TAH Holdings for 3 years and who asked no unnecessary questions. "I'll need the Bell 407 on the 14th, Terence said. "South of Atlanta. I'll send the coordinates." "Dress code?" Mitchell asked. "Black tie," Terence said. Some things were worth the wait. He met with his attorney first. Claudette Banks had been his corporate and personal counsel for 8 years and operated from a glass-walled office in Midtown that smelled like fresh paper and certainty. She was 59, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had a particular way of setting down a document that made it clear the conversation was no longer theoretical. "The divorce is final," she said. "She has no claim on TAH Holdings, never did. The company was formed before the marriage, funded with premarital capital, and she was never listed as a beneficiary, officer, or shareholder. The joint account was the only marital asset, and it was divided equally." She looked at him over the glasses. "You're clean." "I know," Terence said. "Then why are you going to this wedding?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because she asked me to." Claudette studied him. "You're not doing this out of spite." "No." "Then what?" "Clarity," he said. "She built a version of me that she needed to believe in. I'm going to let her see the version that was always there." Claudette folded her hands. "Don't make a speech." "I never do." She almost smiled. "No, you don't." 2 days later, his uncle Curtis came by the house. Curtis was 67, had retired from the city engineering department, and was the kind of man who could fix anything with his hands and explain nothing with his mouth. He sat on the porch in the same spot he'd sat in for 30 years and drank coffee and waited for Terence to say whatever he was going to say. "She invited me to the wedding," Terence said. "I heard." "I'm going." Curtis set his mug down. "Your grandmother would have had something to say about that." "She would have said, 'Don't let them see you sweat.'" "She would have said, 'Don't let them see you at all,'" Curtis corrected. He was quiet again. "But she also would have understood. Some doors you walk through so other people can see who's standing in them." Terence nodded. "You taking the helicopter?" "Yes." Curtis looked at the oak tree. "Good." The following week, Terence attended to the details with the same precision he applied to a structural inspection. He confirmed the venue coordinates with Mitchell. He had a suit tailored. Italian wool, midnight navy, cut by a tailor in Buckhead who had done his measurements 3 years ago for a developer's dinner Monique had never known about. He reviewed the guest list through a contact who handled event coordination at the Whitford estate and confirmed that Table 14 was, as expected, positioned at the far edge of the west lawn, near the service entrance, beside the caterer's staging area. He did not move the table. He did not call ahead. He did not send a message to Monique or to Victor Landry or to anyone. On the Thursday before the wedding, he came home and found a voicemail from Monique, light, practiced, thanking him for RSVPing and saying it would be nice to see a familiar face. He listened to it once, deleted it, and went back to the garage where the credenza he'd been building, cherry this time, for a client in Decatur, waited under a drop cloth with the patience of a thing that knew it wasn't finished yet. Patience was the architecture of every good thing he'd ever built. The Whitford estate sat on 40 acres of rolling Georgia land, with a white-columned main house and a ceremony lawn that sloped toward a creek lined with willow oaks. The guests arrived in a slow procession of black sedans and rented luxury cars, 240 of them, by the coordinator's count, dressed in the kind of clothes that announced themselves. The chairs were arranged in curved rows on either side of a petal-strewn aisle, and a string quartet played something classical that floated across the lawn like a thing that had forgotten where it was going. Victor Landry stood at the altar in a white tuxedo jacket with a rose pinned to the lapel. He was tall, groomed, and had the posture of a man who had grown comfortable being the most expensive person in the room. The groomsmen flanked him. The officiant waited. The guests settled. Monique appeared at the far end of the aisle in a gown that caught the afternoon light, and 240 people rose to their feet, and the music shifted, and the ceremony began with the quiet authority of a thing that believed it could not be interrupted. It was interrupted. The sound came first, a low, building thrum that started at the edge of hearing and grew until it pressed against the string quartet and won. Heads turned. The officiant paused. Victor looked up. The Bell 407 came in low over the tree line from the east, white and clean against the Georgia sky, and it settled onto the north field 200 yards from the ceremony lawn with the measured precision of a man who had landed in tighter spaces and was not in a hurry. The rotors slowed. The door opened. Terence Ashford stepped out in a midnight navy suit, with a fit that cost more than Table 14's entire centerpiece budget, and he walked across the grass with the unhurried stride of a man arriving exactly when he intended to. Mitchell stayed with the aircraft. The engine idled. The guests were standing already. They stayed standing, but the reason had changed. Monique had stopped walking. She stood at the midpoint of the aisle, bouquet in both hands, and she watched Terence cross the lawn with an expression that moved through confusion and into something colder and more complicated. The look of a person watching a wall they had built reveal a door they had never noticed. He did not walk to the altar. He did not walk to the aisle. He walked to the edge of the ceremony seating and stopped, and he stood there in full view of every guest, and he did not say a word. He didn't need to. A murmur moved through the crowd the way weather moves through a valley. Slowly at first, then everywhere. Someone recognized the helicopter's tail registration. Someone else had seen TAH Holdings in the business section of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. The whisper traveled from row to row like a crack finding its way through a foundation that had looked solid from the outside. Victor Landry's expression shifted. He looked at Monique. Monique looked at Terence. "Terence," she said. The microphone the officiant held was still live, and her voice carried across the lawn with a clarity she had not intended. "What are you doing here?" "You invited me," he said. His voice was calm and carried without effort. "Table 14. She stared at him. The bouquet trembled once in her hands. He reached into his jacket and produced a single card, ivory linen, the same stock as the invitation, and he held it up between two fingers so she could see her own handwriting on the back. "No hard feelings," he read aloud. Then he set the card on the nearest empty chair and straightened his jacket. "I wish you both well," he said. "I built what I built. You chose what you chose." He looked at Victor briefly, without hostility. "Take care of what you're getting. It's more complicated than it looks." He turned and walked back across the grass toward the helicopter with the same unhurried stride, and the engine note rose, and the Bell 407 lifted off the north field and climbed into the afternoon sky. And the sound faded the way all sounds fade, when the thing that made them has already moved on. Monique stood in the aisle. Victor stood at the altar. 240 guests stood in the silence between them. The ceremony resumed 11 minutes later. 3 guests had left. She had no idea. She never had. 6 months later, Terence Ashford sat on the back porch of the house on Dill Avenue with a mug of coffee in both hands and the morning light coming through the oak tree his grandmother had planted. And the tree was taller now, or maybe it had always been this tall, and he was only now standing still long enough to notice. He had a partner now. Her name was Jade, a landscape architect who had come to the house originally to consult on the yard and had stayed for coffee and then for dinner, and then, in the way that real things happen, for the conversations that followed. She was direct and curious and had no interest in being impressed by anything except the quality of the work. She was inside now, sketching a planting plan on the kitchen table, and he could hear the scratch of her pencil through the open window. TAH Holdings had closed 2 new acquisitions since the wedding: a mixed-use development in Savannah and a historic renovation project in Charleston that had been featured in a regional architecture magazine. The portfolio had crossed $28 million. He had hired 6 new people. Warren, his operations manager, had called it the best quarter they'd had in 4 years. Terence had called it steady and moved on to the next project. He heard about Monique from Curtis, who heard about her from a cousin who still lived in Buckhead. The wedding had continued, but the marriage had not lasted. Victor Landry's dealership group had entered a period of financial difficulty in the months that followed, related to an overextended credit line and a series of warranty disputes that had attracted regulatory attention. Monique had left him by February. She was living in a rental in College Park now, working in property management for a company that leased mid-tier commercial space. Competent work, respectable, but a long way from the Whitford estate. Her friends, the ones who had called Terence the handyman, the quiet one, the man she had outgrown, had scattered the way people scatter when the story they told themselves about someone turns out to have been about them. Her mother had called Terence once, in March. She had not asked for anything. She had said, "I should have known better than to let her treat you that way." He had thanked her. He had meant it. He registered all of it with the same measured attention. And then he set it down the way you set down a tool you no longer need. The morning was clear and still. The oak tree moved slowly in a breeze that had come from nowhere in particular. The porch railing he had finished, white oak, tung oil, smooth under his hand, held the light the same way it had held it the day he sealed it, and it would hold it tomorrow, and the day after that, because he had built it to last, and because lasting was the only thing he had ever been interested in. Some things, he thought, you didn't build to show anyone. You built them because you knew what they were worth. He was free. He was solvent. He was precisely where he had always intended to be. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.